Welcome all. Hello and welcome to everyone around the world today. I'm so pleased to be able to welcome to our webinar In Conversation With. And today Share International is in conversation with Dr. Eben Alexander. And we're delighted to see you and we look forward to a brilliant conversation with you.
Well, Felicity, thank you so much for inviting me on today. It's great to see you too.
And thank you, it's so nice. And welcome to all our viewers around the world. Today we'll be exploring a topic which is huge in its potential scope. We're looking into what it means to be living in a mindful universe and exploring consciousness and reality and all sorts of amazing questions like that and topics like that. I'd also like to introduce Haley Moore, who is our question monitor for today. Hi, Haley.
Hi. Thanks very much for having me. We're looking forward to a fascinating conversation today. I'd just like to draw everyone's attention to the Q&A button at the bottom of the screen. That's where you'll be able to type your questions for Dr. Alexander and Felicity. We'll be collecting them as they come up, and I'll be back at the end of the conversation to put them to our speakers. I'm sure there'll be a lot of interesting questions, so please be patient with us and try to keep your questions as concise as possible. And we'll try and get through as many of them as we possibly can. Thank you, and I'll see you in a bit.
Thanks, Haley. See you later. Thank you. And I'm Felicity Eliot. I'm the chief editor of Share International magazine, and I'm based in Amsterdam in the Netherlands. And I'd like to say something about Dr. Alexander first. For those who don't know, I'm sure there's almost no one who doesn't know his work, but just let me say something about him. And then after that, I'd like to say a little bit about Share International, just so that people know the context from which I will be speaking. I was about to say and describe this webinar today as a question of life and death. And I thought, no, actually, it's not a matter of life and death. It's a matter of life and being. And I'd like to invite the viewers today to really be with us, to be co-creators with us and really explore with us. I hope you can go with us in your minds and join in so that we make this a combined effort as co-creators together. Now, a little bit about Dr. Alexander before I leave the rest to him to tell you about his amazing story. Dr. Alexander is an academic neurosurgeon, and he's been a neurosurgeon, he was for 25 years. And for 15 years, he worked at the Harvard Medical School in Boston. Now, something extraordinary happened to you, Dr. Alexander, in 2008. I won't say very much because I'd like to leave that up to you. But what I do know is that it was quite miraculous that you survived an extraordinary and rather devastating illness, and an episode which lasted 7 days, in which you were in coma and had the most extraordinary experiences, which we're very grateful you came back to tell everyone all about what happened. And this, of course, changed you, changed your life, changed everything about how you look at life and how you see things. And it made you question all sorts of things, which before that, as a materialist scientist and neurosurgeon, you had not questioned yet, I think.
Right, very much.
I hope I can ask you, if you wouldn't mind, I know you've probably told the story a million times, but perhaps you can give us a description of what happened and then what changes it made. Yes, let's start there.
All right, well, I think it's important to point out, I had grown up in a very scientific family. My father was a globally renowned neurosurgeon. He had been a combat surgeon in the Second World War. And he headed up a neurosurgical training program. That's what he did while I was young. And it turns out he also had a very strong belief in the reality of God and prayer. And he used that belief a lot in his healing. To him, God was an obvious presence, and he knew the power of prayer helped in healing. Now, like many who grew up in the 60s and 70s, I always knew that science is the pathway to truth. And for much of my career, what I can say is I kind of defaulted to the conventional materialist, reductive materialist scientific worldview. And that was the big error, because in fact, materialism in science has been disproven almost a century ago through the advent of quantum physics. That's something we can talk about later. But the reality is, science is fully open and supportive of the reality of consciousness surviving bodily death. And that's what I was in to discover. Now, so what happened to me, it was November 10th, 2008. My life had been going kind of predictably well up until that time, but I woke up with severe back pain, soon realized I had a horrific headache, and I was already lapsing into coma, because anyone in medicine who hears of sudden onset of severe back pain and headache would obviously think meningitis. Well, the doctor was out. I was going down very quickly from an extremely aggressive and primitive and should have killed me case of bacterial meningoencephalitis that was overrunning my nervous system minute by minute. And my family left me to rest that morning and then checked on me an hour or so later. I was having grand mal seizures. Now, I was long gone from this world at that point. I remembered nothing of what happened for the next 7 days on this world. They called the ambulance who came. They tried to break the seizures at home, could not do it. Took me to the Lynchburg General Hospital emergency room. And that's where the very astute physicians thought meningitis might be the culprit, did a lumbar puncture, and out came thick white pus under pressure. And I know Dr. Laura Potter, my ER physician, told me many months later when she saw that, knowing that I'd gone into coma within just a few hours, she realized I was already very deathly ill and probably had only about a 10% chance of surviving the illness at that point. But it only got worse. They put me on a ventilator, put me on 3 powerful intravenous antibiotics, up on the medical ICU room. And that's where I languished for the next 7 days. Now, to my doctors, I just appeared to be dying. By the end of that week, they estimated I'd gone from a 10% chance of survival down to 2% chance of survival with no chance of recovery. And that's why they recommended on that 7th day, stopping the antibiotics and just letting me go, letting nature take its course. But from my point of view, things were very different. And it's important to point out, not only is my book Proof of Heaven the objective evidence about the medical details of my case, but there is also a medical case report that was written by 3 doctors not involved in my care, but absolutely fascinated by this miraculous recovery. That case report came out in the peer-reviewed journal, Journal of Nervous and Mental Disease, in September 2018. And the case report makes it very clear, even clearer than I did in my books, that my brain was so damaged by this infection, by the well-documented neurologic exams, lab values, CT and MRI scans, et cetera. All of my brain was affected. There was no part unscathed. And that's why the scientific world takes my story so seriously.
Yeah, it couldn't have happened to a better person.
Well,
I mean, perfect person. I'm sorry to say it,
but yeah, well, NDEs always happen for the individual. They are, they add up in our culture to a cumulative database, but they're always tailored to the individual. And in looking back on it over the months and years after my coma, it was very clear to me that this answered a whole lot of tremendous questions I had about brain, mind, and consciousness, deep questions I'd really wondered about my whole life. Mm-hmm. And so, in fact, my NDE was very well suited to a neuroscientist with a fascination of consciousness. Absolutely. And that's what it gave me, was these fantastic lessons that the rest of the scientific community now takes very seriously. But getting back into my story, so important to point out, one of the kind of atypical features of my NDE compared to other NDEs is the fact I was amnesic, that I had no memories of Eben Alexander's life. I had no words, no language, no knowledge of this earth, this universe. I mean, it really was an empty slate, a tabula rasa. And I only came to figure out in the months and years afterwards why that was so critical. because it showed me things about memory and about consciousness that were very profound. What it all started in what I call the earthworm's eye view, a very primitive, coarse, unresponsive realm. I remember being surrounded by roots or blood vessels. It was like being deep underground. And it was a very murky existence. And when I used to talk about this in the early days, people would say, was that hell or purgatory? Well, I think hell would be at least a little bit interactive. And even though I had no language at all, I could still wonder, who, what, where, what was going on. And there was never a flicker of response from that world around me. It seemed to go on for ages because I'm sure I had no memory of moment to moment. So it seemed to be an eternal existence. But the good news is I was rescued by a slowly spinning white light that came packaged with a perfect musical melody. And that is what ushered me up like a portal into this rich, ultra-real Gateway Valley. The Gateway Valley had many Earth-like features, but also deep and profound spiritual features. And for those who think that an NDE would be kind of murky and dreamlike, the exact opposite is true. This world is murky and dreamlike. That world is sharp, crisp, real, detailed, alive, transformational, absolutely meaningful. And that's why people come back from NDEs transformed. Their whole life is shifted because of what they've witnessed. And I wish we could duplicate it in the lab, but so far we cannot. And these extraordinary experiences are a tremendous gift to those who have them. And they're also a gift to the world. And that's why I shared Proof of Heaven. That's why I wanted to get it out to the world. And so anyway, what I was witnessing in this beautiful Gateway Valley, ultra real. I was a speck of awareness on a butterfly wing. There was no other signs of any death or decay anywhere. It was a rich, fertile world around me. And being a speck on this butterfly wing, it was one of millions of butterflies that were looping and spiraling in these vast formations of color beyond the rainbow. Just an incredible display of life and kind of fertility and being alive and filled with meaning. Now, I did notice that down below us was a meadow and was surrounded by this rich forest. And as I said, the plant life was absolutely alive, dynamic, flowers, buds on trees, blossoms all blooming and opening in these fantastic kind of tactile and visual displays. Waterfalls into crystal blue pools. And there were thousands of beings in that meadow dancing, lots of joy and merriment, and children playing and dogs jumping, incredible festivities. And all of that was being fueled because up above were these swooping orbs, pure angelic beings, these spheres that were swooping through the skies. And when I came back to this world and wrote it all up into words, weeks later, I said there were angelic choirs, and they were emanating chants and anthems, hymns that would just thunder through my awareness, this incredible power, awe, and majesty. And then there was this soft summer breeze that blew through. And it was something I referred to in my writings much later as a divine wind, or the breath of God, because given my amnesia, I had no religious conceptions. I had none of my scientific knowledge, none of my personal memories. Everything was gone. But that breeze was my first awareness of the power of this divine and infinitely loving and healing God force that permeated every bit of this scene and was absolutely associated with everything down below in material realms, and then also in this kind of higher reality of the Gateway Valley. The best thing about it was I wasn't alone. There was a beautiful woman with me on the butterfly wing, and she looked at me with a look of pure love. And she never said a word. She didn't have to. Her message came into my mind purely telepathically, emotionally, this deep, profound truth that we shared. And that message, you are deeply loved and cherished forever. You have nothing to fear. You are deeply cared for. And I cannot tell you how reassuring that message was to me at that time, because so far it had just been pure confusion, kind of bewilderment, and kind of what's next. But this message from her was so reassuring. And then I started to feel that this was truly our spiritual home. And as much as, I describe the story to people and it might sound foreign, the most important thing to express is it feels very natural. It feels like exactly where we belong, and we feel like we are deeply cared for in that realm.
When you came back, you wrote it all down as fast as you could, and that went into your first book. Was that
Well, the
right?
thing is, I didn't write it down as fast as I could, because what happened, I don't want to get too far ahead of myself, but to answer your question, what happened was when I came back to this world on that 7th day, when I opened my eyes in that ICU bed and I was fighting the ventilator, which I was still on, and they pulled the tube out. And I said, thank you. Now, I don't remember that, but and then my sister said I was sitting there like a little Buddha on the bed saying, all is well to everyone, reassuring them. But it turns out I then had, and I describe all this in Proof of Heaven, but there was a period of a kind of a paranoid, delusional, psychotic nightmare that lasted for about 24 to 36 hours after that awakening. And that was crazy. And it seemed more real than a normal nightmare, but in contradistinction to the memories from deep coma, those memories, that psychotic period after I awakened, vanished within a week or two, whereas the memories from deep coma remained very stable. Now, it turns out I was in the hospital then for another kind of week and a half. When I finally got out, 2 days before Thanksgiving, my older son, Eben IV, who was majoring in neuroscience in college at the time, he came home from school. He had been there during the worst part of my coma, but he'd gone back to school to take some exams after I showed some positive signs. And he came home and he surprised me by driving overnight, got there at 6 a.m. because he'd heard I couldn't sleep at all. So I was up all night. And he gave me this big hug, and he said it was like there was a light shining within me, and I was far more present than I'd ever been before. Now, I had tried to share my NDE with my doctors, but they were so shocked I was coming back, they couldn't believe any of this. And they just said, well, you were so sick, your brain was soaking in pus. We have no idea how you're even coming back to us, but you can forget about it. The dying brain plays all kinds of tricks. Now, this was before I knew any of the medical details of the case. I had no idea how sick I'd been. None of my neuroscience knowledge had really come back to me yet. So I believed what my doctors told me. And so when my son gave me that hug 2 days out of the hospital, I remember telling him it was way too real to be real. So for me, that meant it had to be a vast hallucination. That was what I assumed from what my doctors told me. But and he told me that this is the key part, is he said, because he was studying neuroscience, he knew how fickle memories are. And every time you return to a memory, you can change it. And so he told me, write down everything you can remember about your coma experience before you read anyone else's near-death experience. And that was some of the best advice I've ever got in my life. I wrote about 20,000 words over 5 to 6 weeks. And only then did I dive into that near-death experience literature, and was absolutely shocked to find the similarities with my case and kind of the overlap in territory.
Just before we go on, let's have a slide, and so we can just have a look at your books for people who are not familiar with all your work. So we'll see the 3 books because we have a slide there. So Proof of Heaven was your first book. That's right. What the one that you wrote down as soon as your eldest son gave you the tip and said, don't let other people's memories influence you. So that was the Proof of Heaven. And now we can also see Map of Heaven. And then...
I can explain that. Map of Heaven came out a few years later, and that was really, I've been giving talks to tens of thousands of people about my experience, and a lot of people thought, well, this is an experience that the occasional rare Harvard neurosurgeon has. They didn't realize these things happen every day, and that there are millions and millions of people on Earth who've had these experiences. That's why I wrote Map of Heaven, because in fact, one of the reasons Proof of Heaven was so kind of popular is that many, many thousands of people who had had their own NDE and didn't know what to make of it recognized the experience in Proof of Heaven, and they would write me. And so Map of Heaven is filled with a lot of that kind of correspondence, just showing how common these are. They are part of routine, everyday human experience, not something exotic and unusual. And then, of course, the 3rd book, Living in a Mindful Universe, which is co-written with my life partner, and we do a lot of presentations together on meditation, things like that. Karen Newell, who has been a great spiritual mentor to me and a guide, but really living in a mindful universe is the true proof of heaven. This is where the science and spirituality really come together. It's been highly endorsed by some of the leading scientists studying consciousness on Earth today. It's been endorsed by Ed Kelly. It's been endorsed by Bernardo Kastrup, Bruce Grayson, Jim Tucker, numerous other scientists who support this. Pim van Lommel, who is a Dutch cardiologist who's very respected in the scientific community about consciousness, and many other endorsers. If you go to ebenalexander.com, you can see some of those endorsements and realize this is a book that really provides that, quote, proof of heaven to show us the reality of it. It really is a joy to share these books. And I love getting, especially that third book out there, because I think we're making true progress in this field. But should I get back to my story, or?
Yes, I do. And then after that, I'd like to just bring in a little bit of our background too, because I kind of skipped it. I was so interested in getting into your story. So I skipped the information about Share International and the background from which we speak. So please go on, and then I'll come back to that.
Right. Well, so there was this beautiful angel on the butterfly wing that I discussed, and she was very important to me and very reassuring, a very validating message. Now, one other part of the message that she said at that time, I wish I had expanded on more in Proof of Heaven. She told me you can do no wrong. And unfortunately, people misinterpret that the way I say in the book, as if we can just do anything we want, nothing matters. That couldn't be further from the truth. NDEs teach us the golden rule. Life reviews of near-death experiences are the golden rule: treat others as you would like to be treated, written into the fabric of the universe. And so that God loves us so much as to give us the gift of free will. But what we find is we have a choice of showing love, compassion, kindness, mercy, acceptance, forgiveness for ourselves and for all our fellow beings, or we can divert away from that pathway. And if we divert, we're just asking for a much more arduous and difficult pathway. To mistreat others, to be greedy and selfish and not have the higher good in mind is choosing a rougher pathway. And that means your life review is not going to be anywhere near as pleasant. So live these lives with the lessons of NDEs. It's not just the power of knowing what happens when we die, but far more important from the world of NDEs is, how do I make choices about living this life here today? How do I treat myself and others? How do I manifest kindness, love, compassion, and mercy for all fellow beings to the best of my ability? So it's not really a do anything you want world, but it's a let's learn the lessons and help transform all consciousness. So I'll try and summarize the rest of my journey quickly so we can get to your questions. So it turns out that was not the end of my journey, that beautiful Gateway Valley. That was only a gateway, as I said. And in fact, the angelic choirs provided yet another musical pathway to higher and higher levels. I remember seeing all of the four-dimensional world below, the kind of material world collapsing down. Then all of that spiritual realm of the Gateway Valley with a very different ordering of time. This is important. There's something called deep time, which allows for things like life reviews. A life review, your life is not only remembered, but you relive a lot of the events. So in that stage of the universe, you can actually relive big pieces of your life as part of the learning and teaching of lessons. That is what we mean by deep time. Deep time is a complete kind of meta time that surrounds and enables an unfolding and demonstration within the time flow that we see on this earth, which is not primary. Anyway, so all of that collapsing down, and I ascended up through this portal that had been provided by the music of the angelic choirs into what I call the core, infinite inky blackness, but filled to overflowing with this divine healing force, this God force. And I came back calling that force Om, because to me, when I came back to this world, God was a puny little human word. And I also realized that the fundamental message of the prophets, the meditative traditions of all the great faiths, aligns very deeply. And to try and pretend that only one faith has it right is human egotistical possession. And it has nothing to do with the deeper truth of oneness, kindness, compassion, mercy, and acceptance that all the great faiths through their meditative traditions deliver. I came to realize that it doesn't matter if you call that God force God, Allah, Brahman, Vishnu, Jehovah, Yahweh, that in fact it's part of our deep humanity and deep into the universal presence of consciousness that we find an alliance there that really has to do with sharing these lessons of love and oneness. In that core realm, I was taught many things. I was also instructed, you're not here to stay, you'll be going back. And there were many visions. The visions I had, for example, of reincarnation and of life reviews. Since I didn't have Eben Alexander's memories, I couldn't go through an Eben Alexander life review, but I had these two fantastic visions on separate passages through the core. One I call the Indra's, so the first one was the flying fish version, exactly what it sounds like, where the fish are in the water, that's dumbed down in the material realm, not knowing what our higher souls know. There's a program for getting, so we don't remember past lives and between lives. Then we come out of the water, join together, that's life reviews, that's reuniting with souls of departed loved ones, planning next incarnations, diving back in. The second vision was of Indra's net. That was this incredibly rich higher dimensional network showing us all contributing through these multiple lifetimes to the transformation and evolution of consciousness itself. We can talk about all that later if it's of interest, but I need to tighten this up and finish. I cycled through these realms multiple times. Where I would tumble back down to that earthworm eye view, and by remembering the musical notes of the melody, I could conjure up that portal that would take me up again. Then the angelic choirs, after being reassured by that guardian angel, took me up again to the core realm, more lessons, tumbling back down. Finally, though, what they said, you're not here to stay, was true, and I could no longer conjure up the musical melody, taking me up into the Gateway Valley. And at that point, I witnessed thousands of beings going around me off into the distance, heads bowed, many holding candles, some hooded. And this murmuring energy coming to me was very surprising, coming from them, because it was the same comforting spiritual home feeling that I'd first gotten in those higher spiritual realms earlier. But here it was in these lowest realms with these beings around me. And when I came back, I called that the power of prayer, because I could sense this beautiful feeling of prayer around the world, kind of bringing me back to this beautiful world of ours. Then I saw 6 faces that bubbled up out of the muck. They're very important because they were faces that I didn't recognize at the time because of my amnesia, but I did recognize within hours of waking up, because they were, 5 of them were physically present in the ICU room the last 24 hours of coma. That's very important, as I state in the book, because they serve as veridical time anchors that help to prove the reality of the deep spiritual journey happened between days 1 and 4 or 1 and 5 of the coma experience. And it was those faces, it was the 6th one that really brought me back to this world. It was a face of a 10-year-old boy. Now, I did not recognize him. That was Sunday morning, day 7 of coma. They had protected my son, Bond. Nice name in retrospect. They had protected Bond from the worst news during the week, but then he overheard the doctor conference where it was time to stop antibiotics and let his dad go. All of a sudden, he knew things were horrible. He came running down the hallway. I'm lying there on my ventilator, as I had been for 7 days, eyes taped shut. He pulled open my eyelids, one eye looking over here, the other eye over there, neither pupil reactive. Those of you in medicine know how horrible that is. But anyway, he was pleading with me, Daddy, you're going to be okay. Daddy, you're going to be okay. I promise you. I did not hear him with my ears. I didn't see him with my eyes. I was far too gone from this world. But that message, I knew I had to come back, and I willed myself back to this world. And then it was this giant struggle. As I said, when I first came back, I didn't even recognize loved ones at the bedside, but those memories, language, all that came back very quickly over hours and days. All of my semantic knowledge of neuroscience, neurosurgery, cosmology, physics came back over 2 months. The amazing thing is how those memories were more complete after they returned than they had been before coma. And I explain a lot of that in the book, Living in a Mindful Universe. It has to do with the fact memories are not even stored in the physical brain. But the next 13 years beyond that recovery have been my effort, working with hundreds of scientists around the world to help explain consciousness in a worldview that fully supports the reality not only of the afterlife, but of reincarnation.
as I'm listening to you, it's as if I'm listening to Share International, our approach, and I'll say something about Share International. Share International is actually, it's the name of a magazine, and the word share refers to the idea of the fact that we need to see ourselves as one, and therefore redistribute and share the resources of the world, and more than that, begin to see ourselves as one. Now, as I was listening to you, I could hear echoes of everything that is in our background. I'm speaking as Share International, and here is the magazine, which also puts out ideas like this. We present articles which talk about the needed changes in the world, but we also talk about topics which you've touched on amazingly rapidly, and thank you very much for giving us that great overview. But Share International is a group of actually volunteers gathered around the world, mainly attracted by our own inner conviction and our own experiences, spiritual experiences, and also conviction that things must change, and drawn to it by the work and the, for us, obvious truth of an intuitively sensed truth of the teachings of the ageless wisdom, as we call them. It's actually the ancient wisdom that's been around for millennia that we've known about, and I know you refer to it in your books and in your talks. And Benjamin Creme was the person who founded Share International, and unfortunately he passed in 2016, but was also the author of many books, traveled the world, and his main message, here are some of his books, and by the way, these are freely downloadable books. His main message actually was to do with the oneness of life, the fact that we have to see ourselves as one, and that separation is one of the basic problems, the key problem, or the impulse behind all the problems that we see in the world at the moment. And his work was also to do with the evolution of consciousness, which is why I see so many parallels in your work and ours. To do with the evolution of consciousness as we all develop towards a more and more refined way of being and understanding the reality that we are part of. And one of the main messages in Benjamin Creme's work was the cyclic revelation of some great teacher or lesser teachers coming cyclically again and again to bring the beginning of a new dispensation, a new way of looking at things. And I believe, and so do all my colleagues, and Benjamin Creme talked about this, and he was inspired and given information by a highly advanced being, his master, one of the masters who is now returning with a world teacher. And we believe very much that we are at that point, which is a pivotal moment in history. And it tallies with, you might not agree with all of this, but it tallies so much with everything you've said. For example, the fact that what is consciousness, and is consciousness confined to the material physical world? Well, you've just explained to us that that cannot possibly be, and that memory isn't even located in the physical. And right. What is a human being and what is the reality? So let's discuss that. I'd like to ask you, for example, people, the materialist world has, and scientists, materialist science has had the upper hand for a long time, for many centuries. But now we seem to be moving away from it, thanks to experiences like yours, and thanks to teachings like the ageless wisdom teachings, the theosophical teachings, and so on. So perhaps you'd like to say something about materialism, and then also the coming together of spirituality and science, because I think this is a really, really important convergence.
Well, I think it's very clear that science and spirituality are coming together. A lot of it is around quantum physics. Quantum physics is the founding fathers of that field so clearly delineated, and that would include Wolfgang Pauli, Werner Heisenberg, Erwin Schrödinger, and others who talked about consciousness and how we really cannot get behind consciousness. It's fundamental in the universe. And even though quantum physicists have struggled with trying to understand quantum physics for the last century, as we go into in detail in Living in a Mindful Universe, the pathway forward over the last 40 years has involved experiments based on Einstein's complaints back in the mid-30s, and then John Bell's brilliant insights how to do experiments about those complaints that began in the 80s. That are now culminating in a vision where objective idealism is the most reasonable explanation. That is the primacy of mind in the universe with this top-down causality. It's an extraordinary demonstration of kind of oneness and the fact that we're sharing one mind. Just for your listeners, I'd like to stress that the science on this question of the afterlife and reincarnation really has been pretty much settled in many ways, and certainly beyond reasonable doubt. There was a contest last year. If you go to bigelowinstitute.org, you can read the winning 29 essays that answered the question, what's the best scientific evidence for survival of consciousness beyond permanent bodily death? And those 29 essays were written by people who all had more than 5 years experience as researchers in the afterlife question. Those essays settle beyond any reasonable doubt that the afterlife is totally real. Go to bigelowinstitute.org to read those essays. And I will say, along the lines of what you were saying minutes ago about the one mind, the second place essay there was written by Dr. Pim van Lommel. Towards the end, and it's a very scientific, very beautifully written essay. Towards the very end of that essay, he makes the argument for the one mind. And in fact, he references 4 sources, scientific sources for evidence of the one mind. First is that beautiful book by Dr. Larry Dossey called One Mind. It came out, I think, about 2013 or so. Then there's also a beautiful recent book from Steve Taylor. It's called Spiritual Science. There's a wonderful essay that Bernardo Kastrup wrote. That's Kastrup with a K. You can visit him at bernardokastrup.com. His essay is called The Universe in Consciousness. There's a reference to it in that Pim van Lommel paper. And then I'm very gratified that Dr. van Lommel credited us, Karen Newell and myself, and Living in a Mindful Universe is the 4th major resource in the scientific world for the one mind hypothesis. And what I would add is Pim van Lommel's book, Consciousness in the Universe, is one of the best, most powerful elucidations of the scientific argument for that kind of one mind thinking and the reality of NDEs that I know of. So I highly recommend his works too. But the one mind is really at the core of where science is going on this. And the other resources for those who have a serious scientific bent would be the work out of University of Virginia. UVADOPS.org is their website, Division of Perceptual Studies. They spent more than 6 decades studying things like past life memories in children, suggestive of reincarnation. They have more than 2,500 cases, of which 1,700 are what they call solved. That is, with deep homework, they were able to discover that the person described by the young child actually existed and to match them up with a prior living person. And then also Dr. Bruce Grayson, a world-renowned MD who just wrote his beautiful book, After, about 45 years of research as a skeptical scientist into near-death experiences. And his work is all featured prominently on that website. Dr. Jim Tucker has now taken over a lot of that reincarnation work from Ian Stevenson. And of course, Ed Kelly. Ed Kelly is one of the leaders in the world of consciousness studies. He's written 3 incredibly powerful scientific books on this topic, beginning with Irreducible Mind back in 2007. Absolutely world-changing book. And then he's recently followed up with 2 incredible books. Now he edits these. He writes extremely well, but these he edits input from many different scientists that support these views. His second book, Beyond Physicalism, came out in 2015. It is another world-changing book and the 3rd in the current trilogy, and I hope it will soon be a quadrilogy. But in the trilogy, the 3rd book came out in spring of 2021. It's called Consciousness Unbound. And that is an absolute masterpiece. In fact, I'm the cover endorser for that book. And in that endorsement, I say that properly advanced science and spirituality are essential for the growth of either one. And this magnum opus leads the way. And I cannot emphasize more strongly how powerful Ed Kelly's works are in scientifically validating and supporting the reality of the fundamental nature of consciousness in the universe.
You know, I would like to talk about this, but I'd also like to ask a couple of simple questions, the sort of questions that I think that many people listening might be starting to ask. One thing that you referred to earlier on, and I know it from the Ageless Wisdom teachings too, is I'd like to talk about the golden rule you referred to earlier on, the golden rule, which is written into the fabric of the universe. Now, in the theosophical teachings, in the works of the masters and of Benjamin Creme and so on, I suppose we would refer to this as being mindful of the need to be harmless and to have even more than that. And harmlessness is not something negative, it's something positive. It's not a lack of, it's a positive approach to life and to this issue. And I suppose it is connected with what we would call in scientific terms, and then in more esoteric terms, it would be called the law of cause and effect, or the law of karma. Now, you referred to this golden rule. Could we talk a little bit about that? Would you like to explain it from your point of view and this life review that many NDE-ers talk about?
Well, as I said earlier, the life review really provides a beautiful lesson about the nature of time flow and shows that our little sense of time flow in the material realm is subservient to a much deeper ordering of deep time and causality in that realm. Now, the other absolutely essential thing to point out about life reviews when you talk to many people who have gone through these kind of experiences is you realize that when you go through a life review, you don't experience it from your egoic perspective. You actually experience it from the emotional perspective of those around you who are influenced by your actions and even your thoughts. And that's a very, very important feature to understand. So if someone has been greedy and selfish and busy handing out pain and suffering to others their whole life, their life review is not going to be much fun, because then they'll be on the receiving end of that. And from my perspective, especially when you review not only, the near-death literature, but for example, another one of those winning papers at bigelowinstitute.org was written by Christopher Kerr. He's a hospice physician in Buffalo, and he writes purely from the perspective of people who go on to die. And what he witnesses is the same kinds of experiences. They have visions of loved ones returning to them, becoming aware to them as they often kind of go through events of their life and begin processes that we might call a life review. So it's not just NDEs. This is part of the dying process, as Christopher Kerr makes very clear in his Bigelow Institute paper. And I think that that's really crucial, because it shows us that the afterlife is real, that our loved ones are there, they welcome us, and they also reaffirm to us that it's the good that we've done for others. The more we've honored the higher good and taking care of our fellow beings, the more kind of pleasant and satisfying and actually organic and natural that life review is, as opposed to those who have really been rough, on other people. They have to receive that in that life review. And from my perspective, in looking at all this literature, not just the NDEs, but the broader literature of kind of deathbed visions and especially when you get into psychic mediums. For example, at windbridge.org, you can find a lot of evidence for the scientific validation of certain psychic mediums. Now, I'm not saying that there aren't many frauds out there. It's a sad thing, but there are fraudulent mediums. You have to be very careful. That's why Forever Family Foundation, Windbridge Organization, and others certify mediums. And it's best to go through a certification system if you insist on a medium. But as most mediums will tell you, we all have the power by being sentient beings. We can go through prayer, through meditation, through having an NDE, through hypnotic regression, through dreams. There are many ways we can connect with our loved ones before we get to the point of just needing that in a life review. But we often find that these messages are really of love and of sharing love and compassion and helping others. And for me, it's crystal clear that ancient ideas of kind of karma and kind of what goes around comes around, and the way you act with the world, the way your very beliefs is this notion of the one mind and the primacy of consciousness comes to the fore in the scientific world. We find that our beliefs are very powerful. And of course, we've known this in medicine for decades. The placebo effect, which has been used to great effect for thousands of years, and has been the gold standard in medical trials looking at new treatments for the last 6 decades, the placebo-controlled random trial. The thing that most people miss about placebo is it shows you how powerful your will is in your own healing and wholeness. And if you go to, for example, noetic.org, the Institute of Noetic Sciences website, put in a search term, spontaneous remission, you'll uncover a book that they put together there in the mid-90s with more than 3,500 cases of people who healed from cancers, from advanced infections, far beyond any medical intervention, through spiritual factors. So prayer and positive emotions, having a broad outlook on having purpose in life. These things, our beliefs have tremendous power in shaping the world that unfolds for us. And the more those beliefs are positive and affirming, and especially about the higher good and helping others, the more positive our life journey is every single day.
Yeah, absolutely. What I'd like to talk about too is very interestingly, as you came back, one of the key things, one of the major things you brought back was the notion of there's unconditional love, that our whole reality, the universe as we know it, is actually an outpouring of love, and that our lives we're not judged. It's an unconditional love. So that's one thing I'd like to point out. The other thing which resonates very well with the Ageless Wisdom teachings and what Benjamin Creme made available in his books is the idea that, and many people don't know this, I think, but you've talked about it, and it was your experience, and it's the experience of many people who've had near-death experiences, that we incarnate in groups, in family groups. And these groups may be a spiritual family, or they may be a physical family, people you know. So people recognize people, what you've just talked about, that, and it seems to be absolutely the case that people see and are welcomed by family members who have passed on, or that they're a group of people you might not recognize them from this life, but somehow they are your people, you know them. And this is explained by Benjamin Creme as a brilliant mechanism that's provided by the universe for working out our karma, for working out the next step. And I think you've also mentioned in your work that during a life review, we also look at our lives, make an assessment, and decide how the next life will be. So this idea of harmlessness, knowing yourself to be one with everyone, knowing that whatever you do and however you are in your being and the quality that you bring to life, that impacts everything. And that must surely make us begin to think about, well, how can we put into effect changes that will make life aligned with the, let's say, the spiritual purpose of our universe, so that everyone has a chance to live in an aligned way, according to, we call it a plan, the sense of the purpose and the destiny of our universe.
Well,
if
yeah,
I could put it that way.
I would simply like to point out that, all of this discussion of kind of loved ones appearing to us, this idea of soul contracts or soul agreements, as you're pointing out, that is all a huge practical implication of a field called transpersonal psychology. I would say in many ways transpersonal psychology, which is just the observation that you have to go beyond the ego and the person to really get to the roots of one's lifetime and why one has the given challenges and issues they face. What are the pathways forward for growth? Well, transpersonal psychology is a beautiful kind of practical system of approaching that. In many ways, it began, say, with the work of Carl Jung, the famous Swiss psychiatrist back in the mid-20th century. His observation of things like synchronicities, that the universe often gives us these deep clues about connection. They go far beyond what we would think in our materialist minds about connecting pieces, and yet synchronicities are all around us and very can be very profound instruction about living our lives. Now, from the work of Jung, then in the 60s, for example, Dr. Stan Grof, he did work with LSD originally, then with hypertrophic breath work, but his work, and then Brian Weiss, Dr. Michael Newton, Richard Schwartz, and others. I mean, they've done incredible work to help kind of elucidate the power of acknowledging, and this is through either hypnotic regression, through meditation, centering prayer. That's how I personally have approached past life memories, is through meditation using sacred acoustics, which is a very powerful form of differential frequency brainwave entrainment. But all of them are talking about this bigger kind of vision of who we are, and that is really the best way to start making sense of our lives and the challenges and hardships we face. In many ways, I believe we kind of set up as milestones. I would say our free will is manifest in how we deal with those in this lifetime. So even though my higher soul might have agreed that I would, for example, be put up for adoption when I was 11 days old, my higher soul agreed that I would have to wrestle with alcohol, and I had to give up alcohol in 1991, very early in my medical career, because I knew that on my nights off, I leaned a little too heavily on alcohol. But that was a gift to me. Having that hardship was a gift. And that's one of the most beautiful things to understand about this bigger seeing of self, beyond an ego version of self, is that we're here to grow and learn. And when we can escape that silly little ego, the ego is not who you are. So many of us think that running stream of thoughts in our heads is who we are. I love how Michael Singer, in his book, The Untethered Soul, he calls that voice in your head your annoying roommate. Yes, absolutely. Period. Don't take it any more seriously than that. And the ego is right there front and center at the core of toxic addictions, all the things that wreck our lives. In fact, I would see this false sense of separation from materialism is at the core of all the greatest problems of our world today. The economic polarity, the greed, corporate greed, and addiction to fossil fuels, and our ego diseases that lead people to suicide and to do mass shootings, and the insanity of our world is from the false sense of separation inherent in materialism. That's why this model, this scientifically validated model of one mind, that we're all in this together, fully supported by NDEs over thousands of years from these life reviews, shows us a different way of living, where we learn it's not about that stupid little ego. And the ego in addiction work, there are tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of cases where you have to do a ritual sacrifice of that ego to actually come out more wholesome. The ego would rather see the host dead than itself dead. That's why addictions are so deadly. Coming up to the year ending in March of 2021, we had more than 100,000 drug overdose deaths in the United States, an all-time record. Horrific diseases of the ego, false sense of separation, not realizing we're all in this together, we're all connected, we're all responsible to help each other, to take care of refugees, the least, the last, and the lost. These are deep and powerful lessons that will reverse the horrible toxicity and polarization of our current society with all the egotistical political leaders and autocrats. It is high time for the better senses of humanity to rise up we can live a far healthier, happier existence, peace, prosperity, harmony for all fellow beings, as this scientifically validated model of the world, of the one mind, of the shared sense of the binding force of love takes over our thinking and rescues us from the insanity of materialist non-thought.
Exactly. Very, very well said. And I couldn't agree more. The Ageless Wisdom Teachings posits that we are, as you've said, souls in incarnation. So here we are working out the purposes, the meanings of ourselves as souls. And the more we accept that as a reality, the more we can begin to make the changes that we've just talked about. Because I think it's some of the masters say one of the major problems is the sense of separation, and the sense that, and which is a false, it's a false premise to start with. And it separates us off unnecessarily from ourselves and from life itself and all forms of life on our planet, and the sense that we belong to a far greater being, and that whatever we do should be to serve that greater being. And as you've talked about in both today and in your book, is that there's a royal road to discovering oneself as a soul, and that is through meditation. And I know that you practice a particular type of meditation. People who work with Share International and with Benjamin Creme have also put forward a particular type of meditation, which is a kind of service to the world as well, because I'm sure you know about this and or have heard, whether you agree or not, I'm not sure, but there is the notion, and it's posited in the books by Benjamin Creme and the master Joel Kuhl, the Tibetan master, that there are huge, powerful cosmic energies flooding into our universe and onto our planet, making the changes. And there are people such as yourself, such as millions of people who are wanting a different way of life, who are responding to these new ideas, which are bringing us together. There's a synthesizing movement. People are wanting to work together. They're seeing the connections. They're making the connections, as we're doing today. And so there is a movement coming from people. And the basis of it is, and that's wonderful, it's not theory, it's empirical. It's our experience. And there's such a convergence of this now, so that you have a growth of people power, a growth of the sense of there is a new reality, and we're all tapping into it. And this is the key. And if we think that, in a way, consciousness is reality, and through that reality and that consciousness and understanding how it works, we are going to make the changes that are needed through understanding ourselves in a completely different way. It's a redefining of ourselves and our reality, and understanding our place in the universe.
Right. Well, those are all beautiful points. And in our book, Living in a Mindful Universe, we talk about what we call the supreme illusion. And that is just a reminder to people that in your consciousness, when you look out and there's that beautiful world and all the stars and the clouds and the trees and the beautiful world around us, all our fellow beings, every bit of that, never forget that what you're experiencing is a model within mind. And as much as we want to think that that physical world out there is out there, one of the deepest and most profound lessons of quantum physics is none of it exists independently of the observing mind. And this is where the modern interpretation of quantum physics, as we discuss in Living in a Mindful Universe, I love Bernardo Kastrup's work on this because he really takes it to the next level. He's done a brilliant job. He wrote a book called The Idea of the World. Just by way of example, I would recommend any of you into the quantum physics, take that bare bones relational quantum mechanics of Carlo Rovelli. But unfortunately, Carlo doesn't go far enough in terms of the deep metaphysics to explain it all. And that's where you really need Bernardo Kastrup. People can visit bernardokastrup.com to learn a tremendous amount more about all of this. But there is no question about the mental layer of the universe, this top-down causality that is not the bottom-up physical causality that so many materialists think is there, driving all of this. So they would argue that all of human evolution is the result of the kind of random action of electrons, protons, quarks, photons in the subatomic world, following the laws of physics. In fact, materialist science, if you claim to have free will, they will scoff at you because they think that it's all just electron fluxes and chemical reactions in the brain. It gives you an illusion of consciousness, an illusion of free will. They are dead wrong. There is truly free will in this universe. We're responsible for our choices. That's one of the deepest lessons from NDEs and from this emerging science of consciousness. And it's a real gift because this can bring healing to us, just like placebo effect. Well, it's not just physical, mental, and emotional healing, but true wholeness and healing involves spiritual healing. And spiritual doesn't have to be religious. For me, spiritual has two definitions. One is an acknowledgement of oneness, that we're sharing that one mind. The other is the notion that there is purpose and meaning to it all. And that's all you need for spirituality. You don't need ancient ideologies. You don't need ancient scripture. It's still all about human experience in the modern era, teaching the same lessons that the beautiful prophets of thousands of years ago taught of love, kindness, compassion, mercy, forgiveness, and this applies to self. One of the things that troubled me so much when I came back from my coma was I realized that the vast majority of the world's problems are not because we don't love our neighbor enough and our enemy enough. We don't even love ourselves enough. There's a sacred divine beings that we truly are. And that's not your little ego mind. No. That's why for me, meditation is opening up. I put that little ego voice of Eben Alexander into timeout, because then I can open my true consciousness across the veil into this beautiful wisdom of loving acceptance and oneness and a shared benefit for all.
Now I'm looking at the time, and I think I'd like to ask Haley to join us, and let's start looking at I see there are a lot of questions that have come in, so let's take some of those and see how we go. We'll be trying to answer those questions for at least half an hour, and I'm sure we could go on, but let's start. Haley, over to you.
Thank you. Yes, we've had some great questions. I'm going to go as quick as I can to get through as many as I can. There was a lot of questions at the beginning based around the idea, asking Dr. Alexander what his beliefs about reincarnation were before his NDE, just to see how that may have colored his experience.
Before my NDE, even though I'd entertained the possibility of reincarnation, I never took it seriously. And in my 20 plus year in academic neurosurgery, I would say more and more, I could not understand how consciousness could survive bodily death. And therefore I just dismissed reincarnation. I had no idea that in Charlottesville, Virginia, that ever since the late 1960s, they had been doing tremendous scientific work that absolutely supported the reality of reincarnation, the work of Ian Stevenson, the work of Jim Tucker currently. And it really is beyond any doubt. I mean, you review this literature and there's no way that there's not some form of memories from one lifetime that have an emotional impact on us. That is personally lived, not just kind of randomly accessed, but that, for example, children who have these memories, they have nightmares, they have phobias, they have all this stuff that means they didn't just kind of casually observe these memories of somebody else, they lived them. And as the doctors who study reincarnation will tell you, you have to harvest those memories before age 5 or 6. Most of us probably have some of these memories. It's just that they get covered over. They're processes that I call programmed forgetting, that has to do with kind of the soul journey. There's something about forgetting those past life memories or between life memories to give us skin in the game to buy into this incarnation, so that if we had all that highest knowledge of our higher souls, we might not be as prone to learn the lessons. Although I believe that with proper spiritual advancement, we're even in better shape to learn the lessons with meditation, centering prayer, this kind of acknowledgement. But to answer your question, no, I had no serious idea of reincarnation before my coma. My coma journey showed it to me very clearly in those visions I described earlier, the flying fish, the Indra's net. But it took me years to understand what those visions meant. I didn't even include them in proof of heaven because I was still mulling them over in my mind, trying to make sense of them. But they, through meditation, and so I said I use sacred acoustics from sacredacoustics.com, a very powerful form of differential frequency brainwave entrainment to help me free up from the sense of here, now, and sense of self in deep meditation. And that's where I've been able to start coming into contact with some of my own past life memories through deep meditation.
And here's one that actually might apply to both of you. Is there an end to the cycle where we stay in heaven?
Well, what I would say is I believe, first of all, I believe the whole purpose of all this is along the lines of what Pierre Teilhard de Chardin wrote in his book, The Phenomenon of Man, in the mid-20th century, back when debates were raging about Darwinian evolution in the scientific circles. But he realized as a scientist, he was a paleontologist, so he studied as a scientist billion-year time cycles. And also he's a French Jesuit priest, so he was very spiritual. And in his book, he said, well, there is an evolution going on, but it's not the simple biological evolution on Earth, but all of consciousness evolving throughout the cosmos. That's what I believe is absolutely going on. And just like that old saying, all politics is local. Well, likewise, all evolution of consciousness throughout the universe is nothing more than the evolution of thinking in individual sentient beings coming to a deeper understanding of their relationship and purpose with the universe at large. And I would say from our human perspective in the current era, we cannot see the endpoint. We can see an endpoint that's projected from, say, a 5,000-year epoch of human history and destiny. And that involves this deep sense of love and oneness and coming to see that one mind, that God force is absolutely real, and approach that oneness with that divinity. But we can't see the furthest reaches of this at all. We're just too small and too puny. Even though we can access far grander kind of mental, spiritual space in meditation and centering prayer, I would say from our perspective now, it is simply approaching that oneness as a group, as humanity growing into Homo sapiens. Sapiens means wise. Well, I would say what I see looking around this world, in spite of the benefits of science and technology through medicine, communication, transportation, et cetera, but the toxicity of our materialistic addiction to science and technology, with our addiction to fossil fuels, economic polarization, plastic pollution, just incredible destruction, threatened extinction of more than 30% of the world's species already. We are in deep trouble, and it's caused by Homo sapiens. It's time for sapiens to truly mean wise, which means we need to evolve to this next level quickly. This model of the one mind and of caring for others and not the profit motive, and the polarized political situation of our time, that's anathema. That is the antithesis of Homo sapiens. We need to grow into true wisdom.
Maybe Felicity.
Yes, I would just like to say from our perspective, that is precisely why we say this is a pivotal moment. There is a change from what you would hear in the Hindu scriptures, what they call the Kali Yuga, the Dark Ages, and we're now moving into a new time, a new era, where these sort of things are possible and become possible. And I believe that is exactly why the masters are here. There's a new dispensation coming, why people are open to these ideas, because there is an evolution of the consciousness, and we're able to, it's the beginning phase, of course. It's not perfect yet. We have a lot of growing to do, as you've just pointed out, Dr. Alexander. But I believe we will make enormous strides, particularly with, and if we're correct, the return of the masters to the world, so that people are inspired, begin to understand themselves as being souls in incarnation, see the purpose and the meaning of their lives. The minute someone is in contact with the soul, they become more altruistic, turned towards service of others, serving the planet and all life forms. So if this information is correct, and I believe it to be so, then we're at that stage of starting to make our tentative, but I think also at the same time determined, for many of us, very determined steps into a new time with a new dispensation, a new way of looking at things and relating to one another and ourselves.
There's a book that I just wrote a chapter in that exemplifies all this kind of thinking. It's called Our Moment of Choice. And I highly recommend it to anyone who's interested in kind of the social implications and our kind of cultural changes that need to happen to help us come into this oneness and this really rescue our planet from the ravages of the false sense of separation of materialism.
You say our moment of choice.
Our moment of choice.
Okay. Thank you. Haley.
That leads into a question that I have here. What did your NDE teach you about the possibility for social justice and world peace? Which I think you've been bringing out, but.
Well, yes, I think it's absolutely imperative. I mean, the biggest and most powerful lesson of NDEs is not what happens when I die. The biggest and most powerful lesson is what do I do every moment in this life, every second, every breath, in bringing this heavenly vision of harmony and peace and prosperity to all of our fellow beings, bringing it to this world. How do I live? How do I think? How do I view myself? How do I view my relationships with others? How do I view my responsibilities? How do I view what agreements I might have made as a higher soul coming into this world? How do I focus my free will in those choices, decisions, and what it shows me about my relationship with the universe? How do I tell that story, that narrative, share it with the world to help other people to get on board with this? Because this is where we grow. The between lives is not where our souls grow. It's kind of like a breathing spell between lives. But the lifetime here, temporarily dumbed down to kind of the knowing of our higher soul, this is where we actually live. And this is where we transform as souls. And it's through what we can do to bring these kind of visions to light. How can we share this? How can we help our fellow beings? How can we all rise to this level of responsibility in our choices? Take care of those refugees, the least, the last, and the lost. Social awareness and justice are absolutely imperative from the point of view of near-death experiencers and the message they bring to this world of the binding force of love and the healing power of that love in our world today.
Yeah, I would just like to say, you've mentioned a number of books which sound really fascinating and really important. So perhaps I can ask you later on for a list of these titles and the authors, and perhaps we can make those available because this will be put onto our YouTube channel and so on, and we'll make those available to people who are interested so that continue to read for themselves and to explore further.
Absolutely. That would be great. I'd love to.
Good. Thank you.
Okay, this one might be a big question.
Uh-oh. A big question.
Why does the ego exist?
Well, I think the ego actually serves a purpose. It's kind of a protective mechanism for animals, in a fight or flight mode, predator prey. So there is something to be said for an ego, but it becomes very toxic in our modern era. If we want to see ourselves as Homo sapiens and acknowledge some of this deep and profound kind of sense of connection and bigger sense of consciousness that is coming into alignment with some of the greatest lessons from spiritual traditions going back thousands of years, we need to realize that little ego, the little protective ego that might help us grab more food at the table, competing with our siblings or something growing up, is not of any great use. And it actually becomes very toxic. As I said earlier, addictions, and they're out there by the millions in this world. I'm not just talking about to substances like alcohol and drugs, addiction to work, addiction to exercise, addiction to sex, addiction to love. People can be addicted to all kinds of things that can wreck their lives. Those are ego demands. And so growing beyond that and seeing yourself as more than just that little possessive ego is a very important of becoming more of a citizen of the modern era, a true kind of Homo sapiens, living with this knowledge of kind of the oneness of mind and a deeper sense of purpose. So the ego is just an albatross. It holds you back. And it very early on in my meditative practice, that became the staple, was I would let my ego voice, Eben Alexander's little ego mind, state an intention, make a request, ask for help. But then that voice goes into timeout, and using something as powerful as sacred acoustics, that deep meditative ability that it brought me was a beautiful way to leave that ego far in the dust and come to realize just how healthy a higher soul can be when it manifests more fully in one's life, unencumbered by, a restrictive, kind of primitive, immature ego.
Mm-hmm. I'd like to add to that, slightly different take on it, but I totally see what you're saying. What I would like to add is that partly is to do, from my point of view, from our point of view, to do with evolution. And the fact is that the soul, for the moment, and because of the way we live and because let's say our level of advancement or lack of level of advancement, the soul actually cannot manifest itself very well at the moment at our level. And it works through I think we need to make a slight distinction between, let's say, the ego, which is this demanding and wonderfully described what did you call it? Nuisance of a roommate.
Oh, the annoying roommate.
An annoying roommate, exactly. On the other hand,
Michael Singer's term.
Very good. And on the other hand, there is the personality, which is actually functions as a vehicle for the soul, because how else will we, apart from through our vehicles, we are souls in incarnation, and we have a mental vehicle, we have an emotional way of dealing with the world, and we have a physical vehicle. And so the soul needs these vehicles in order to express itself. And the more the person evolves, the more we have near-death experiences, the more we find out that we are souls through meditation and so on, the more we're able to bring in the qualities and the abilities, and from previous incarnations as well, talents, abilities, aptitudes, etc., which can then work through the mental vehicle and the personality. And in fact, as the person grows, and we know this because of the people we've met and the shining examples that we know of through history, they shine. As your son said, you shone as you came back. They shine because there is the light of the soul coming through the personality. It is becoming manifest in everyday life, on the physical plane, in our ways of being. And this is living, and the more we can do that, the more we're living in alignment with our true purpose. Every life, by the way, if I understand correctly, as I understand it, every life we come into incarnation with 3 or possibly 4 quite specific focus intentions, things that we need to work out. We have 4 goals or purposes, some 3 or 4, and we need to work these out in this life. And as Dr. Alexander mentioned, if you choose let's say the less comfortable way for yourself, in the end, you're taking yourself away from that, and you're, as you said, giving yourself a rough ride and a rough road. What should be happening, as I understand it, with meditation, with service to the world, etc., is that you become more and more the soul that you really are. And that's what you see shining. That's what you see shining through people who are, let's say, the geniuses or the spiritual. And when I say genius, I mean genius of all kinds, whether it's in the medical profession or in music or in art or science, medical science, and so on. You see the light of a different quality shining in these people. And that is the manifestation of the soul through the personality. So we need the personality, but there's this kind of ego part of it, which one of the masters, actually the head of the masters, his name is Maitreya, the world teacher. I haven't said much about him, I'm afraid, but you can read all about Maitreya and his mission here, as he is the teacher who's come back now. I've forgotten what I was going to say. Let me see what I was going to say. Yes, he calls the ego that you were talking about, Dr. Alexander, he calls that the second personality. It's as if we develop a sort of false persona, and it takes on all of our addictions, all of our bad habits and so on, and it keeps sort of talking to us and giving us either a negative sense of ourselves, which limits us and limits the possibility of the soul, or it gives us quite the opposite and also limits. And one of the main things we need to learn, of course, and take into account is the need to establish with ourselves and with each other right human relations in every possible way, in every field and every sphere of life. So that's my answer about the ego.
Well, absolutely. And I must say, I'm in agreement with all that you say about the ego. My earlier statement was kind of a recoiling to help people realize how damaging, that kind of secondary personality can be.
Absolutely.
If it dominates. And unfortunately, it also works in the world at large. And we kind of see that kind of a crazy, egotistical secondary personality at work with all the polarization and friction and warfare and conflict in our world at large. It's an active force. But I often say that, in spite of what apparently is a world of, going down in flames with all this conflict, I believe that is kind of a symptom of the fact, or an indicator that we're actually going to emerge from this madness, because those secondary personalities, they recoil because they feel threatened. They realize this kind of thinking, this kind of worldview is very threatening to them. And so it's kind of the last phase before a huge paradigm shift.
Precisely.
This kind of insanity that is manifesting all around the world today, with the autocrats, the narcissists, the violence, people killing innocent strangers. I mean, that is sheer madness. The very fact that anyone talks about using nuclear weapons in the modern era is absolute insanity of the highest order. And it's really time for us as a society, for the kind of saner minds around this world, and I'm convinced that most of humanity is sane, should rise up against these forces of kind of darkness and separation and kind of planetary suicide. And it is time for this world to come back to a more sane, true Homo sapiens. And that involves that secondary personality writ large around this world as something that will ultimately respond to kind of the reason and the attractive forces of love and compassion and kindness as they bring wholeness to the world.
Exactly. Yeah.
Well, just to maybe change the subject a little, we have a question here asking if Dr. Alexander would explain what he means by Indra's net. Is that the term?
Okay, that was that second vision that I said that was so absolutely profound in the core realm. These were visions from the deepest sanctum sanctorum of the divine, when the whole higher dimensional universe had been shrunken down to this complex oversphere as part of the lessons I was to learn. But the Indra's net version, it was a vision, and it was a higher dimensional, almost like a web, this beautifully interwoven web of golden and silvery threads, all interwoven. And what I saw were that these interwoven threads were the kind of like breathing. They were the lifetimes and between lives of sentient beings throughout the cosmos, all interwoven and contributing, all going towards this golden core. And to me, when I read Pierre Teilhard de Chardin's works, probably 8-10 months after my coma, about the phenomenon of man, and realized this evolution of all consciousness was what was going on, that Indra's net version really came alive. And it's a term that comes from ancient Hindu teachings that I really don't know much about. It was just a term that was introduced to me. And to me, it fit perfectly with this kind of interwoven nature. And it really showed how each and every one of us play a crucial crucial role in this. No soul left behind, as Karen and I often say in our workshops, because every soul really does contribute to this evolution of consciousness. And that's why it's so important that each and every one of us come to the highest level we can in terms of seeing the higher good, bringing love into the equation, bringing love and wholeness into our vision for how we act and treat ourselves and others in all of our daily actions, and really for the vision for our life. And the Indra's Net was just an absolutely spectacular vision. And also it showed me in many ways how deep time provides that we never, ever truly get to that goal of that oneness, at least not from the perspective of Earth time. And yet it's an incredible journey of growth and transformation that appears absolutely magical when viewed from this perspective because of its transformational capacities.
There was asking for you to comment on a statement from a New Age concept of time. Quote is, "In truth, time is not a process, but a state of mind. When humanity is one, and in fact and in truth, time will disappear."
May I answer this? Because right next to me, I have an article in which from which that quote is taken. And I was just about to start reading it to give you time to look at the question. So there's a synchronicity for you. Let me explain to Dr. Alexander. The book I'm talking about and the article I have next to me, in Share International magazine, which I haven't said very much about, the monthly magazine, we have the great honor to have a master of wisdom, one of the ascended masters, a great advanced being, writing an article every month. And he wrote those articles through Benjamin Creme, which was given by a mental telepathy, not in a mediumistic state or as channeling and so on, full conscious, deliberate, complete awareness of what he was doing, mental telepathy. And the very first article that Benjamin Creme's master wrote for Share International magazine is called A New Concept of Time. And just before we started today, I actually underlined some I hate underlining in books, but I did for today. And I'd just like to read something. It says, a couple of simple sentences. When humanity is one, in fact and in truth, time will disappear. When man approaches life from the inner creative standpoint, time will lose its hold over our minds and thus free us from its tyranny. All this requires a new assessment of man's place in the universe and the establishment of a truer rapport with the source of our being. And then he talks about it as being a cyclic activity and how the masters understand it's cyclic and non-cyclic. And I'm sure, Dr. Alexander, I remember you talking about the sense of in-breathing and out-breathing, this ancient idea of manifestation and returning to a state of non-manifestation. And there's just one more sentence, if I may read it from here, if I can find it that quickly. Yes, a new world order, political and economic, is the essential prerequisite for this truer vision, for the required sense of oneness can be achieved only when harmony and justice prevail. What this means in practical terms is the creation of structures, political, economic, and social, which will bring men together and create the sense of oneness on all planes and in all fields. So, and this is to do with a new sense of time. And he's talking about it scientifically as well, because he talks about how we have begun to have a new definition of time. Over to you, Dr. Alexander.
I would say that time is one of the most fascinating topics in modern physics that is totally not understood. Anyone who thinks it is clearly not aware of the modern science around all this. I often call this the nexus of now, this notion that time at some level seems to disappear as we come deeper and deeper into an understanding of deep time. And I often like this discussion, not from some, the questioner was talking about some new agey disappearance of time, but I like to think of it, for example, there are modern scientists like Bernard Carr, a very renowned British physicist, who's written about hyperspatial models that include different dimensions of time and different orders of temporal causality. And I think Bernard Carr's work is absolutely on target. It takes kind of higher dimensional space and time seriously from a physics perspective, and shows us ways that we can start to come to a deeper understanding of this profound mystery of time and this apparent kind of deep time and sense of the nexus of now, which is just kind of our perspective of past, future, and everything present. This beautiful kind of centerpiece of our understanding is how I would put it. But there certainly are scientific models that go to the next level. And it's one of the most vigorous and active debates because it's right at the core of trying to put together quantum mechanics and relativity, which so far have been like oil and water. They do not mix. You blend the equations together and they give you infinities where they shouldn't be there. And it's nonsensical. So there's something deeply wrong about either quantum mechanics or relativity or both. And yet they both independently seem to withstand incredible tests. And I suspect that it's really around our poor understanding of the nature of time, which is treated differently in quantum mechanics as opposed to relativity. And that's the source of what I think is a huge amount of confusion in the modern world. And as we can come to a deeper understanding of time, we will actually be able to come closer to that unified theory that is so much of a holy grail for the modern physics community.
Yeah, I'd just like to add, as I see it, also as I've read, that in a way, it seems as if everything is happening at the same time as well, so that we can almost look into past incarnations, future incarnations, talking about it from an incarnational point of view. It seems as if the time and space are quite, well, you've been talking about deep space, but it seems as if one is able to see, and apparently the masters see, all of time, as it were, at the same time. As there's no time, and as you know, of course, there's no time in when one is out of the physical body. Time is an expression of ourselves in a physical body as we know it so far. But there's so much more to be said about this.
One thing I would add to that very crucial fact is that I believe firmly, and there's a lot of scientific support for this, that time and space are ultimately absolutely dependent on a deeper understanding of consciousness because they are created within that mental realm. And that, in other words, there's not some time and space flowing along independent of our minds. And I think that is going to become more and more obvious as we unravel the deep mysteries of consciousness from a scientific perspective over the next few years and decades.
Yeah, that's more or less what I wrote in one of my notes for today, saying that consciousness is the basic reality, and out of that comes time and space and so on, and that the new science will come from our perception of our place in reality and as part of reality. So this is, I've written, time and space will somehow emerge out of consciousness.
They do. That is absolutely true. And we will unravel that. Ed Kelly's books, for anyone who really wants to go deep, they get way into all of this. Beautiful work from Henry Stapp, from Bernard Carr, Bernardo Kastrup. Ed Kelly himself is absolutely brilliant on these topics. I cannot recommend those books highly enough. A bit lighter fare would be Living in a Mindful Universe, our book, which really goes into a lot of this and helps to explain what's important, where the next steps are.
As we finish off, perhaps we can put up the slides again to show your books and then our website and web addresses and so on. And Dr. Alexander, we've only touched the surface, I have the impression. So may I invite you sometime, would you please come back and we can continue this conversation and go deeper into all sorts of things that we've tickled the surface of. Thank you so much. I would
absolutely love that. Yes, that would be beautiful, because you're right. We're just beginning to tickle the surface of this deep question of consciousness and the nature of reality, but there's so much more to be said. But hopefully we've given plenty of resources to people today. You can learn a lot more about me at ebenalexander.com. A lot of interviews, a reading list that's very extensive and has links to many papers that are important. I would encourage people to visit ebenalexander.com. The FAQ is very informational, especially about some of the public versions of my story that are false out there. And the FAQ really gets at that deeply.
Fine. So let's see those slides so we can see those websites and have a look at that. And Dr. Alexander, if I may come back to you at some point to get a list of some of the books that you've referred to, that would be great. And we can put them with the, we can somehow circulate that list.
I will say that most of them are on that reading list on
right.
ebenalexander.com. So
Great.
Most of them are there. A few I still have to add.
Good. Thank you so much. Haley, thank you very much indeed. I see we have 40 more questions, which we haven't even started on. So we'll keep those for another time and come back to it if we may. Thank you so much, Dr. Alexander. Thank you, Haley.
Thank you, Haley. And thank you, Felicity. This has been a wonderful conversation. Thanks for having me on.
Thank you so much. And thank you to all our viewers. Thank you. Goodbye. And I hope we see those slides as we leave. Thank you.